This meeting is being recorded.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted this week to have an old friend of mine who was at school with me. And then we met again at Staff College, where he was one of the smartest of our generation. And that's a generation who went on to be 3- and 4-star generals, a number of them. But we've all gone and done different things in our life. But he is particularly interesting in that he then had a second career in education, where he was a very inspiring teacher, and then used the skills that he'd learned both in the military and in teaching to set up his own compassionate leadership consultancy. But not happy with that, he also writes a marvelous series called the Sam Green series, which are about a sort of female version of James Bond or Reacher, who always gets into some amazing scrapes. And we need her right now to sort the country out and all the conspiracy theories that are going on. She needs to be able to stop them before they take over the world and the country. So without further ado, I'll let him introduce himself and talk about what he's currently doing at the moment and what makes him passionate. Over to you.
Jonathan, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for clearly over-expanding everything and anything I've ever done, and I'm likely to do in the future. Roland Ladley, I've just turned 60, and Jonathan's right, I'm on my third career, in that I was in the military from 18, became a school teacher for a good slab of time, and then worked my way through to deputy head, and then I'm now running this compassionate leadership program. Also, I do write these novels. Married, 2 children, first wife. Right, first wife, of course, and she's absolutely delightful. And I'm in a motorhome. So if you're worried about or concerned or interested what the background is, it is a motorhome. And I suppose the thing that Jonathan didn't mention, which I suppose is interesting from a whole life perspective, is that we lived in a motorhome for 5 years once I finished teaching, and we traveled Europe and everywhere, really, just really trying to get the most out of this very short life that we've been given. I think that's probably about enough for me.
Yeah, and it is an interesting one. And I think as we find, sadly, my brother David died of cancer last year, and he was only 3 years older than us, Roland. You know, we'll start to lose friends and people we know. We won't lose them as in they're somewhere down the garden, but we can't find them. They will actually die, as we will. Yeah. So I think making the most of our life is very important. And to be able to touch the lives of so many people and give them pleasure and interest as an author is a great achievement. And let's talk firstly about what I think. I normally ask people what inspiring leadership means to them, but I'd actually like to hear you talk about compassionate leadership and how you define it, because I find that very interesting. And then what got you on to write the Sam Green series and other books that you've written. So let's talk firstly about compassionate leadership. But for people listening, how would you define it? And when you've had a compassionate leader, apart from it was something you practiced yourself you ended up as a colonel in the army, a full colonel, and also in your teaching, what do you find makes a compassionate leader?
I think the first and most important thing to mention is that compassion doesn't mean you don't make and can't make difficult decisions. It doesn't mean that you can't tell people that they're not necessarily doing the right thing or you want to do things differently. It doesn't mean that you can't, at the end of the process, remove somebody from the job if they're not doing the job well enough, or if indeed they're a bad actor within your organization. It's absolutely compassionate leadership. Compassionate leadership doesn't shirk from those responsibilities. Indeed, actually, it really does dwell on them, if you like, those responsibilities. It's really, really important that you don't lose sight of that very, very important process. And frankly, certainly more in schools than in the military, it's something that middle leaders and senior leaders in schools really struggle to do, have those difficult conversations. Having said that, compassionate leadership, Jonathan, and I know that you may not necessarily coin your own leadership by the 2 words compassionate leadership, but I know it's absolutely a mantra that you follow. It's about getting to know your people. It's about investing in them. It's about spending time with them. It's about giving them clear communications. It's about really having empathy where you can find it. And it doesn't matter whether they're the guy that cleans the kitchens in the school, or your newest private soldier in the military, or whatever on that spectrum. You treat them all the same. And of course, everyone who's listening to this will say, well, that's exactly what I do. Of course, that's what I do. I mean, that's how all good leaders are, aren't they? And my experience is that's not necessarily the case. And so it's about having that empathy. It's about finding that relationship. It's about spending time with them. It's about communicating your intent clearly, but then going along and checking on them. One last thing, and I'll let you then to ask me supplementaries. I think that people who say, but that's what I do, I would argue that for quite a few of those people, they spend a lot of time with those people that they find easy to spend time with. So those members of their staff, those members of their team, their business, who they have rapport with, they have a great relationship with, those teachers in schools who do their job well, who integrate well, who do the extra mile. Those people who go the extra mile. Leaders have no problem talking to those, having empathy with those people, having compassion with those people, asking them, the various bits and pieces to make sure their business is going well. Those aren't necessarily the people that you really need to find the compassion and empathy for. Leadership is you spend 10% of your time on 90% of your, sorry, you spend 90% of your time on 10% of your people. I think I was about to misquote that. The bottom line, excuse me, the bottom line is it's finding the guy who is, or the girl, who is the most difficult person to get to know, the person who isn't necessarily doing a good job. It's the person whose desk you might avoid as you're walking across the floor plate. I'll remember that quote in a second, but it's about reaching everybody and spending more time, if necessary, with those people who aren't necessarily in tune with your intent, who don't necessarily follow, who don't necessarily understand what the ethos of the company is, for example, or the school.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. And this thing about people who are different from us, I think many of those who suffer severe mental health problems often can't cope with people who are very different from them. They want just to be with people like them. And those who are the healthiest have that diversity of understanding people from different backgrounds. Sure. And you and I saw this in the military, that we came across some very good leaders. We came across some incredibly arrogant, privileged people who thought they were leaders, but they were misleaders. They were not inspiring at all. They expired those, or they were bullies and were thoroughly unpleasant and threw their weight around. But talking of bad actors, you mentioned that term, which I thought was a great one. You've got this great series, which my wife and I have got every single one of the Sam Green series. How many others? Is there 9?
There are 8. There are 8 at the moment.
Ninth, you're thinking about the 9th at the moment. But tell people about the Sam Green series and how you chose Sam as the heroine of your book, and roughly what they'll get when they have a read of the series.
Well, the madness of this is I'm a maths teacher of science degrees, science masters. I'm as illiterate as the best of you, and yet somehow with imagination and with all the other bits and pieces that have been going on in my life, I suddenly wanted to write some stuff down. And when I left the school, I had this opportunity, and I could have followed, as well as running the consultancy, I could have, in my spare time, I could have followed a number of artistic, if you like, leads. And I just wanted to stick some stuff down. And there is an anecdote, which I can come on to later, of something happened in my military career, which was, if you like, a spawn, the start of this, if you like. But I was picked on at school, Jonathan. You and I have had this conversation before. And one of the outcomes of that is that I'm not a particular fan of bullies, and trust me, all bullies have reasons to be the way that they are, and we need to, in individual cases, understand those and deal with them. But I was picked on at school, and I don't like, and I really have struggled with people who bully and organisations who bully. Sam Green is one of those people who was almost certainly persecuted at school, and who struggled when she was in the military, because she's on the autistic spectrum, because she's savant in the way that some kids with ADHD have, and I, if you like, I was drawn to this mythical person who was never, absolutely not me in a skirt, not me in a skirt from when I was in the military, not me as a girl when I was at school, but absolutely somebody who had been through the mill, and I wanted to give her a voice. And when you have that in you, you then have to use your experience in order to write. Well, what did I have experience of? Well, a little bit of the military, some teaching, some travel, and that's really how it came together. So I wanted to give voice to, sorry, as an aside, when I was in teaching at school, I spent a lot of time with kids who were on the autistic spectrum, some really very difficult children. And I saw actually how marvelous they could be if you directed them, if you looked after them, if you had compassion for them and empathy for them. And that also inspired me, if you like, to launch Sam Green. Frankly, then she just got a life of her own. I don't write her. She writes, and I know it sounds a cliche, but she does write herself, if you like. She is her own person, and she gets ahead of me often.
Well, it's a cracking read.
Thank you.
I'm neurodiverse myself. Mine is dyslexia and dyscalculia. And I was described by my unfortunate teacher at the time, who didn't know about these kind of things, that I was thick, age 7, and I was going to be a dustman because I couldn't spell and I couldn't do my maths. But I went on to do pure and applied maths at Welbeck with you.
You did.
And I went on to do an MBE through the Open University and become a visiting professor at a business school. But I was determined to prove that person wrong, that I wasn't thick, because they made this judgment on me because I was struggling so much with it. So for me, I really related to it. Now, not that I'm on the autism spectrum, maybe I am. I think perhaps all of us in some way are along the spectrum. But it was very interesting to me. What was the experience that happened in your military that gave a trigger to this book as well? Perhaps would you share that?
Oh, well, this when we were at staff college, Johnny, you'll remember that we were asked to write a staff college paper, and all of us in our own way decided this was an opportunity to prove to anybody who read it, and certainly the senior staff at the college, that we were the next Montgomery or whoever. And I decided at that particular point I wanted to show, to some extent, the futility of technology on the battlefield, because if you over rely on technology in the battlefield, then you can really come unstuck if you're not careful. And I decided to put this together by way of a story. So I wrote a short story as my staff college paper. And because I'd done the masters, the engineering masters at the previous bit of staff college, I was really very much up to date in where technology was on the battlefield, and so I was able to use that in this staff college paper. And I remember my DS at the time, my directing staff at the time, the guy that was responsible for me and you, and he read this. And he said, "This is nonsense. This is not a staff college paper. You really cannot put this in. I'm not prepared to accept this." Whereas the academic who was looking after me said, "This is absolutely the first draft of a decent novel." And I said, "Well, look, it is what it is. Put it forward." And I was shortlisted for the Commandant's Prize.
Oh, well
so
done.
I realised at that point that not only did I loved telling a story. I'm an Imagineer. I love telling a story. Actually, I was obviously reasonably good at it, and that's, if you like, is the gestation of when I appreciated that I could do something, and I enjoyed the technology bit. I mean, I don't know if you've read Tom Clancy, or if anyone who's listening to this. I mean, he delivers some really fantastic detail, and I'm clearly not in his league, but I do like to think that the detail is important. So that also comes through.
And I think that's one of the things that I'm almost sort of living the story as I'm reading the book, but at the same time, I love the detail and your knowledge of technology and the military and things that go on, and there's MI5 and MI6 in there. Like Tom Clancy and Reacher and things like that. I'm sure. When's it gonna be turned into a TV series or a Netflix series? I'm sure there must be something being lined up, because it's I
must admit, I thought this was a leadership expose, but if you're, I'm absolutely delighted to talk about anything, frankly. That's also another interesting vignette. I was skiing towards the beginning of the third book, and I was skiing, and I got a phone call on the slopes, and I sort of fumbled my phone out of my pocket, and I said, "Yeah, hello," and it was this guy with a very thick, almost East End of London gangster accent, and said, "Hello, what's his blooming name? I've forgotten his name. Frank Harper here," and I went, "I've no idea who you are. I'm sorry, I've no idea who you are. I've read your book. I want to make it into a film." I mean, from that, you know, that's what every author wants to hear. Well, Frank wasn't as good as his word, in that he did want to make it into a film, but he needed a screenplay first, and he said, "I want you to write me a screenplay." So I wrote him a screenplay. I've never written a screenplay in my life. It is a completely different discipline. I wrote it, he edited it, and then we have literally for the last 6 years, because it's a 6 1-hour series thing of Unsuspecting Hero, the first book. We've asked everybody. So if anybody out there at the moment, and in the film industry, who's looking for a realistic six-part series, then I have a screenplay ready for you.
Yeah, well, I think it would make a really good film. So I would back that and support anybody in the film industry who's listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ron. And is it on Audible yet?
Yes, it is. So this is very good of you. The first book, Unsuspecting Hero, has been read by a lady who's currently in journalism, and it's on Audible. You can buy it now on Audible. Unsuspecting Hero.
That's great. Well, as neurodiverse,
she's done a fabulous.
Yeah, that's my way of learning. Okay, great. Well, look, Roland, you know, the next thing I always am interested in with the inspired leaders I have on the series is that, because modesty aside, you are an inspired leader. I always found it so even when you and I were orienteering together. I remember we were often out in the forest together with our maps and compasses. But your life journey, what shaped you? You know, your parents, your upbringing. I seem to remember father was a soldier, and also ran a pub. But what shaped you, as well as like me? I was bullied at Welbeck. You were bullied at school. You know, this idea of championing the underdog and stopping bullying, I think runs true for both of us in our lives. What else in 5 minutes sort of shaped you, particularly give us an idea of some of the things you did in your army career, because that was very interesting as well. Some of the jobs you had and places you went.
Sure. I joined the infantry from Welbeck, as you know, Jonathan, and I know you ended up in the infantry too. That was quite difficult to do, and I joined the infantry because my dad was an infantier. And I thought it was, I don't know, it's something that attracted me. I've always been into fitness, and I love the uncomplexity of the general infantry soldier. I just love them, and I don't want to, and I hope I'm not in any way coming across as disparaging in that respect. You know, the average Tommy are just the best. I mean, I'm still very good friends with lots of them, and my RSM is a very, very dear pal of mine. So I love the uncomplexity of the lack of complexity of the infantry, and I joined because I wanted to join my father's regiment, which is what I did. And really, as you know, that when you go to Sandhurst and you come out the other end, you join your regiment, you're on a bit of a conveyor belt. It's not very difficult to get off. It's very difficult to make some wrong choices, because it's a meritocracy, because you've got people who are looking after you. You've got the system who wants to get the most from you, and goodness, they bleed you dry. One of the reasons I left. If you just run with it, you end up where you end up. And I've been inspired by some really, really fantastic leaders, and I think that's not the question you're asking. I think that I loved being on operations. That doesn't make me a warrior, because actually, in the end, those operational jobs I did were all in peace enforcement, peacekeeping. So I never went to Helmand, for example. I was not in a warrior fighting vehicle crossing the start line in one of the Iraq wars. I mean, that wasn't, again, my choice. That was where I found myself. I ended up. But absolutely, I absolutely adored being on operations with soldiers in situations, certainly post-conflict. I served in Bosnia and Afghanistan, in Sierra Leone, post-conflict, where we were actually making a real difference to people's lives. That came to me most, I think, probably in Sierra Leone, where I was chief of staff of the United Nations mission in Sierra Leone, when it was at its height. There were 20,000 soldiers, and we were the security for the first free and fair elections in Sierra Leone, and watching that unfold for me and making that happen, and it passed off at that instant. Making that happen was really important to me. And I found it absolutely, because Sierra Leone is also one of those places. Any of these countries which have yet caught up with where we find ourselves, in terms of what we've learned as a nation, in terms of democracy and the rule of law and everything else. These people who are going through that growing business of really beginning to understand what it's like to be an independent nation, having just been ravaged by the most awful civil war. It was so enlightening for me to be able to be involved in the process which took them on that further along that journey, and do that in an effective way. I mean, it is by complete chance that when I was the ops officer for the 1st Division in Bosnia under the NATO banner. It was also exactly then when Bosnia held its first free and fair elections. So I know a little bit about providing force and soldiers for securing elections, and how important that process is, and how we, as individuals and also as groups and nations, really take. If we don't cling on to democracy and our ability to better influence it and vote on it, if we don't grab that with both hands and hold on to it for our dear life, for dear lives, then I think we're missing point. Yeah. So that's, if you like, and so that's if you like the more the bigger issues. But there is something really special about being an infantry officer.
Yeah.
And I'm not in any way saying anything against about all the other officers and all the other corps. There's absolutely something completely organic about serving with infantry soldiers, being as an infantry platoon commander, being an infantry company commander, being an infantry commanding officer. There is something really, really very. I mean, you can reach every bloke and every girl now, and long may that continue.
Yeah.
And they taught me more. That those soldiers and the way those soldiers behaved, and the way that you could make them do things they didn't necessarily want to do, but actually was part of their mission, where you could get them to do things in a that they weren't necessarily prepared to do. I think that's fantastic. A real privilege. We can talk about privilege later.
No, I think you're so right, and I look back and I've got sort of a little memento here with my little Scots Guards poppy. My platoon that I commanded in the Scots Guards on attachment when I was a Royal Signals officer was some of my happiest days. Maybe it was in Cyprus and we were doing the Double Mountain Marathon, which you and I love.
Yeah, did that.
And also commanding a company in the Green Howards, now the Yorkshire Regiment, in Warrior in Bosnia. Was again some of the proudest, happiest moments I had. If you look back in your time in the army, who would you pick out as a couple of inspiring leaders who you'd say also were compassionate leaders, and you want to give them a call out as being really great leaders? Who would you name?
When I was a platoon commander, my RSM, let's just call him Bob. My RSM Bob. My RSM, he was the battalion's RSM. I was just a subaltern. If you don't understand the rank structure, he is the senior. Sorry, and clearly you do, but there may be people who listen to this who don't. He was the most senior soldier, and I was a platoon commander. So if you look, I don't know if you can see my hands. He was up here in terms of influence, and I was down here running a small group of soldiers. And he was absolutely upright. I mean, he's both physically upright. But both in terms of physical courage and fitness, he was absolutely up there. But morally, he was completely and utterly upright. I never saw him scream at a soldier. I never saw him make a bad decision. But the soldiers, they revered him. They loved him. I mean, and that's a very, very it's a emotive word, but it's a really, really important word, I think, when you're looking at leading soldiers. And he was absolutely inspirational to me, because not only did he manage to command that respect in such an easy way, but he was first in, and I don't mean in, out of the trenches. He was probably one of the first people in work, and he'd be one of the last people to leave work, and he was everywhere. And there's one particular example. Can I give you an example of why he was important? And it may seem trivial at the outset, but it obviously not to me, because it's stuck with me for 35, 40 years now. We'd just finished training somewhere on a German plane, and we had to get our vehicles on train flats back to our base. And that was not an uncomplicated process. But at the end of that, once we got our vehicles on, then we're all going to get on the train, or most of us going to get on the train and go back to barracks. One of the captains had brought a car, and he shouted across to me and said, "Hey, Roland, come on, come back. We'll be back in time for the train will take forever, because it takes forever to get across the German countryside. We'll get back into the mess and have a couple of beers." And Bob, RSM Bob, came across to me, because I wasn't in the car, and he said to me on just one side, almost like the other guy couldn't see him, he said, "You're not getting on that. Am I allowed to swear?"
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You're not getting in that effing car, sir. You're staying with your soldiers. You got it? And Bob was absolutely right. So, and he was absolutely right. And why didn't I know that when I was 21? Well, I didn't know that when I was 21. I didn't, I'm learning we learn about leadership and management every day, that we're responsible for people. And I didn't. And I got in the carriage with blokes, and we all got back together, and we all got home late and dirty and smelly and absolutely exhausted. And I wasn't one of the officers coming out of the officers' mess, and having had a couple of pints, meeting my soldiers half cut, which was an awful thing, and I hope never happened in my unit. But it was just interesting. But he had that aura. And he's still doing it now. So he left the army, but at the same time I did, maybe a little bit later. He was commissioned, made it up to major, left the military, and he's now spending his life moving around East Anglia, looking after other soldiers who've left the military.
Wow.
And I have the greatest respect for Bob.
Well,
really got that he has that aura. Very
fine story, and it does remind me of Ian Buckley, who, like your father, came through the rank. He was in the Royal Signals, but he served with the Commandos, and got his dagger. Was a very strong, fit guy. I think I'm sure he's still alive. But when I went to Harrogate to the Army Apprentice College as a young Royal Signals troop commander, I came in and I saluted him. He was a captain, and I said, "My name's John. I've come to report for duty, sir, and I hope you can teach me, because I'm willing to learn. I've only just come from Sandhurst." He said, "Boy," he said, "you have just come from Sandhurst. I thought I had some little shit who was so pleased with himself, but you got the right attitude. You learn from me. I've been an RSM, and I will look after you, and I will teach you." Yeah. And he taught me how soldiers thought, and how that whatever had happened the night before, I was there before them, running with them, never talking and bragging about my party antics or anything like that, just leading from the front. And inspirational, Ian Buckley. Roland, next question for you. Happiest, proudest moment of your life, and the darkest moment of your life, and work or life, whatever it might be, and what you learnt from them, what they taught you that you'd pass on to others.
Let's talk about the darkest moment of my life first, shall we? And I think mental health is really important. My younger daughter has been beset with mental health issues for a good 15 years, and so I have a little bit of experience in that. And not only that, as a teacher, you come across it often. I think the darkest moment of my life is one of those days when I woke up in the morning and really, really didn't want to go to work, and I absolutely sense how some people have a breakdown. Some people break down, and they cannot, get themselves dressed and get into work. And I need to be a little bit careful here, because if people listen to this who know me and know the school I was worked for, they may be able to unpick this and put names to the vignette. But I'll give it my best shot. I was there was a senior. I was a deputy head at the time, and there was a senior member of staff who was really struggling to work properly, and was actually, frankly, cutting corners and not necessarily doing a great job. And I put my hand up and said, "Look, I have some leadership experience. Why don't I go down there and mentor and coach that person, see if we can get through this?" And so I went down there, and I actually worked it out of their office. And I'm not bragging by saying I still did all my other work, which I did. I was still teaching, blah de blah, but I did. I worked out their office, and I worked for 3 months, and it didn't take me very long, although I knew already where the issues were, and I was very honest. I was very frank. These are difficult conversations which I talk about, which is so important. And I had those difficult conversations, and it was a lady. Had those difficult conversations with a lady under no uncertain terms, and she maybe typically had answers for everything, and I knew that the only way out of this, and it absolutely wasn't my responsibility, the only way out of this was for that woman to be removed from post, that she didn't fit with the school's ethos, and it wasn't going to work, and she didn't have the experience. Actually, she didn't want it really. And I'd like to spend 30 seconds at some point talking about privilege, but she was in it for the wrong reason. She wanted to run this particular part of the school because of the accolades that came with it, not necessarily because of the choices and difference that she could make. At the end of 3 months, I hadn't given myself a time frame. I knew that I wasn't actually going to make this work. So there was nothing that I could do that I hadn't already tried that was going to, other than the senior management, to actually remove her from post, or the head to remove her from post, which she wasn't prepared to do. And there are all sorts of good reasons and bad reasons, poor reasons for that. It wasn't going to work. And there've been 3 or 4 days where I literally didn't want to go and sit in their office and have the same conversations. I was emotionally completely and utterly drained. And I can understand how people have breakdowns. I went in on Saturday morning, because we worked on Saturdays, and I wrote an email, because it's always helpful, I think, to when you have an issue, to articulate it down on paper first, rather than go in. And then it also gives the person, this is a leadership help, if you like. It also gives the person that you're having a difficult conversation or a conversation with, have a chance to read your mind first before you go in their office. And I sent the email, about to send the email to the head, saying, given this 3 months, it's not going to work. Over to you. I'm really sorry. To all intents and purposes, I failed this, and I was struggling. About 15 minutes later, before I'd sent the email, the lady I was mentoring came into the office and said, literally burst into tears, and said, "I can't do this anymore. I've got to go." And those 2 things happened at exactly the same time, which was just complete luck. So we got the result. I got the result that absolutely was best for her, and also best for the school. In fact, she's gone on to do much better things by doing something different. She was a round peg in a square hole, and everything was sweetness and light. But just before she walked into the office, I have never felt exhausted, so alone, so actually disappointed with myself for not making something work. And it was a real struggle, but in the end, it was fine. You could argue that those are 2 sides of your question, Jonathan. That's both one of the worst things, the most disappointing, the darkest moments, but also, if you like, at the end of that, because I'd managed to make something happen. One of the best. I mean, I have been one of the luckiest people alive. I've got a lovely wife. I've got fantastic children. I had a brilliant. There's not a moment. I would say, would you miss the army? And I said, I wouldn't have missed a moment of it, and I don't miss it for a moment, because I moved on, and I wouldn't have missed a moment of it. Every hour, every day I spent in the military was just perfect. Do I miss the school? No, not at all. I had a fantastic 8 years. Really enjoyed it. I absolutely adore teaching. Do I enjoy what I'm doing now? Do I enjoy influencing other people by coaching and mentoring them? Absolutely. Do I enjoy writing? Absolutely. Do I enjoy traveling? Absolutely. Do I have a particular moment in my life that I would put above any of those? Clearly, the day I got married, clearly the day I had my first and my second child, my grandchild is just the apple of my eye. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
There is one particular instance which I would put necessarily above the other.
Yeah, no,
winning the
lovely
800 meters, winning the 800 meters in the battalion as a subaltern.
that was
there are thousands doing the walkabout like you did, Jonathan.
Yeah,
It's absolutely up there.
Which year was it you went and did the Cyprus walkabout?
Oh, 1999. We won the boot. We won the boot.
Wow, well that's fantastic.
So I was really pleased with the team. Me, the then was it the RSM? He might well have been a different RSM at that particular point, and actually a full corporal. There three of us did it, and we had just fantastic, exhausting but great.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's a moment I'll remember all my life, coming in through the finish line.
Absolutely.
With your experience in teaching, what piece of advice, if you went back to see yourself age 16 to 18, would you have given to yourself? Roland, this matters, that doesn't. Just thinking about people who've got children that age 16 to 18, what's your bit of advice to them?
I think, and I've used this piece of advice a lot, and maybe if I give you the example of how I've used the advice, that may put some flesh on the bones rather than give you in a sort of generic term. I was there at the school for 8 years. Every year, the next set of prefects would be announced, and there'll be a bunch of very pleased kids and a bunch of very disappointed kids. And the piece of advice I'd give to them is that head boys and head girls don't always, more often than not, don't make captains of industry. Head boys and head girls don't go on necessarily to be consultant surgeons. They don't necessarily go on to be ministers of government. They don't necessarily go on to be lieutenant generals or generals or whatever. The people who go on to do that are those people who've taken education seriously, who have a joy for life and work very hard. So this disappointment that you may be feeling now, that you didn't make prefect or you didn't make head boy, head girl, it's very transitory. Not important, because you've still got the whole of your life ahead of you to make all those differences that you need to make. So my advice to me would have been, this is just part of the journey, Roland. You have every opportunity now to make a difference as you go along. You must seize the opportunities. It is at the end of the day, Jonathan, as we both know, though, unless we come from very well-to-do and families, or we win the lottery, at the end of the day, it's all about endeavour, isn't it? I mean, clearly you've got to have talent in some areas. Clearly you've got to learn. Clearly there's a whole load of education. I know you've done a lot of, you are much better qualified and educated than I am in terms of leadership. But what makes your success is endeavour. If you're not prepared to work hard, if you do work hard, then you pretty much can achieve most things. So don't be disappointed where you find yourself. The opportunities, and it doesn't matter whether you're 16 to 18 or whether you're talking to a 6-year-old like me. I'm currently practicing the guitar a lot. And have a guess. You know how I get better? By practicing, by working hard. That's how you improve.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. And I love that story, and particularly the word of endeavour, which reminds me of Shackleton and his endeavour. And it's a great story about what he did on Elephant Island, and he came back and he lost no men. He actually, all of them came home. If you could change your life, what would you do again differently, or was there a crucible moment in your life that you want to highlight? One or other of those, really? What do you think?
I don't want to just reaffirm what I told you about 7 or 8 minutes ago, which I'm the luckiest person alive. And I know that there's an element of danger of being flippant here, or too pleased with myself. Actually, more pleased with myself than flippant, probably. That there isn't. there isn't anything in particular that I would. I mean, I think the timing of the major decisions that Claire and I have made together, like leaving the military at 44, we both, because my wife was a house parent, leaving the school after 8 years, those things, and then doing the things that we've done. I think the timing of those have been fortuitously good. Very fortunate that we've made those decisions when we've made them. And I think the military is struggling now. I think it's struggling in terms of numbers. I think there is an element, and I don't know, because I haven't really kept in touch. Do I miss it? I wouldn't miss a moment of it. I don't miss it for a moment. So I don't really know. But as my understanding is that the numbers are a problem. I think that lack of operational opportunities now is a problem for the military. I think that equipment is a problem. I think that money's a problem for all government departments. So I'm glad to be out. I'm glad to be out of that. And you and I had the best careers at the best time, I think, probably.
I would agree. I would agree with that. Now, thank you for that, Roland. And we're going to do a quick whistle-stop tour around just the components of the particular model that I am interested to hear from you. And just really your top tip on each, because it just a little soundbite would be perfect. Firstly, moral quotient, true north. What's a tip you'd give people when they lose that true north? They come off true north, they drift away from it, they make a mistake, and they have to bring themselves back. What would be your top tip about that?
I mean, I think, and again, this may be too try to comment, but I think the most important thing, if you like, which helps you wake up, is that the bad news doesn't get better with age. So if you haven't quite got something right, if you've made a mistake, I think the most important thing is to front up to that. I mean, as a boss, I mean, at one point my largest command span was 1,200 people. I'd like to think that what I engendered in those 1,200 was, if you've messed up, then we need to know about it now. This is and frankly, we can deal with it. We can deal with why you made that mistake in due course, but we need to get on and sort it out. So I think that the true north thing is, I mean, some people are just not very moral, Jonathan. There's nothing you can do about it. Some people cut corners. Some people will continuously make bad decisions because that's the way that they are. But those people who feel that they need that they want to follow a path which is, I use your words, true north. I think the advice is the moment that you know that you've gone, then fess up to that, acknowledge it, speak to somebody, speak to the person who it affects. If necessary, if you can, speak to your boss. It's about being honest with yourself. Bad news does not get better with age. It really doesn't.
Beautifully put, and so true. When I think back to mistakes that I've made, or when I lost my way and had to admit to mistakes I'd made and crass things I'd done, I think poor judgment. I looked back through my army career of 20 years and got the past reports. And I think the thing that sunk me at one stage and prevented me from getting promoted as the earliest opportunity post staff college was the fact that somewhere in one moment, to a person I never met, but he said, I questioned his judgment, and that's a killer. If your judgment is questioned, you are dead in the water. And I've learned from that since, whatever it was that I must have done, where he questioned my judgment, a person I'd never met, but was up in the senior ranks, some story must have got back to him. Was
I mean,
salutary.
I mean, I can just dwell on that for a second. I think it's really important. Some people just don't have great judgment. There is an emotional intelligence thing going on here. If your emotional intelligence quotient is high, then most of the time, nearly all the time, you'll make good judgment. Some people don't, and that's not their fault. It is just the way they are. I mean, some people are good at some things, some people are not so good at other things. If your emotional intelligence is not great, you may well make poor decisions. The beauty about being responsible for others, the beauty about leading, is that you can take advice. Now, I'm not one necessarily for collegiate decision making. There was a time and a place for that, and I could spend a lecture on it because but what I'm suggesting, and you can't make decisions unilaterally, but if you find yourself not necessarily making great decisions, and if you're in the military, when you're under real pressure and you
This meeting is being recorded.
So Roland, we were laughing just there, you and I, about communications. You were the regimental signals officer and I was in the Royal Corps Signals. And we've got a problem at the other end. It's other enditis, as we used to call it. But we were talking about decision making. So would you just sort of finish off your thoughts on decision making?
You break now.
This meeting is being recorded.
So Roland and I were laughing about the fact that both of us were in the world of communications, one the regimental signals officer with the Royal Anglians and the other one in the Royal Corps of Signals, and we always had problems and blamed it on the other end. Hopefully you can hear our message. We were talking about decision making there, Roland. Would you just pick up the point?
I lost you, Jonathan. No.
Can you hear me, Roland?
The problem, it's.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, hi, Roland Ladley, ex-military, ex-teacher, now running a compassionate leadership organisation, giving advice and support to members of the teaching profession and also the civil service. And I'm also an author, but that's not a sideline, but it's not as necessarily as important as supporting other people in their leadership roles. Jonathan's asked me to give you a top tip. I think that the top tip is this. Whatever you're responsible for, the worst thing that ever befalls that organisation may well happen on your watch, whatever it is. You won't necessarily be judged on that. You'll absolutely be judged on how you deal with it. So my very, very clear advice is every day when something happens, it's the way that you focus on and get your organization through that, which is much, much more important necessarily than why that thing went wrong in the first place. Clearly, you're going to work out why over time and make sure it doesn't happen again. But it's absolutely, you'll be judged on how you deal with it, not necessarily on the fact that it happened on your watch.
Brilliant. Great advice. Roland, thank you very much. Having you on the series is a great honor. I love your books, as does friends of my wife. And I wish you every success with your compassionate leadership. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Jonathan, you too. Thank you so much. And good luck with the course you're going on.
Thank you. Thank you, Roland.